first off, thank you, Eli, for welcoming me to speak at your event today. It's a great honor. Before I jump into the peer-to-peer, can I get a show of hands? How many of you, as an enablement practitioner, has experienced a seller just that won't listen to you, whether it's because they think they know everything, whether they do know everything? It happens, right? And before I jump into the actual presentation stuff, I do want to share a story with you all. So the reason I like to make peer-to-peer part of my enablement program is because when I first started my enablement journey, I had one of those experiences. We had a seller. He was really good. Don't get me wrong. He was hitting quota. He was a seller for 20 years. He was a seller for almost as long as I was alive at that point. So his mentality was, what can I learn from you, right? And the incredible part is that a lot of the enablements that we did for him, he probably found it useful. He never verbalized it, but he probably found it useful. But the one time he did verbalize to me something that stuck with me is we did our SKO. And at that SKO, and Eli kind of told a little bit of this story when he first made the introduction, right? Folks come up to you, they tell you what they like about their SKO. He came up to me and said, wow, I always thought like I knew better, but hearing from how my peers think and how my peers handle a situation and how it differs from the way I handle it, maybe I might use it, maybe I might not, but now I have that perspective. And having that perspective opens up a, whatever you want to call it, a quiver, ammo, to be able to execute on my sales process in a hopefully more efficient way. So that's when I really realized that in order to get through to those really experienced sellers that may not find me credible enough, the best way to get them enabled is to get people on the stage or give people a forum of folks that they trust and earn that credibility that way. And once you earn that credibility, you actually open them up to wanting to listen to your other stuff more and more. So I really wanted to share that story first before I dove into the why of peer-to-peer. And I kind of talked a little about this, but I like to start with the why as well, just like Penny does. And at some point we have to talk because apparently one of my old direct reports used to report to you too. And she said, one of you is going to be better than the other. I'm like, okay, so we have to fight it out. I'm kidding, she loves us both, Louise Archer. But we kind of talked about some of these benefits already, right? The biggest point about peer-to-peer is that we're helping them gain new perspectives, right? I would have done things one way. You would have done things another way. We know that in sales, there's not always one single correct answer. And because there's not always one single correct answer, we can approach the sales process in many different ways. But how do we know what works and what doesn't work, and in what situations one will work better than the other? Now, we can show them from an enablement perspective, but again, going back to that credibility standpoint, if they're hearing it from another rep that is in the field with them, that ran into a similar situation, and understanding the outcome of that situation, they're gonna be able to have that new perspective, right? And as we put our reps, our field reps, in a spotlight to teach others, ultimately, they're learning themselves. Because as they're talking about their stories, they're gonna get questions. They're gonna get comments. They're gonna get feedbacks. And in order for them to be able to confidently present their information, they're gonna have to prepare their stories ahead of time. I know that I can't just get on a stage like this with zero preparation and be able to talk the way I do. You're gonna hear a lot of filler words, and I kind of still do that, so apologize for that. See, there we go right there. So if I don't prepare, then I'm not gonna be able to do this confidently. So by putting them in a position of being able to be spotlighted in front of their fellow AEs, fellow SDRs, fellow SEs, they go into it with more preparation, and ultimately they're learning how to do that as well, and ultimately becoming better storytellers. And if you work in a smaller organization, a lot of my past experience are Series A, Series B, Series C type of companies. Let me ask this. How many of these companies that you've worked for have completely figured out their go-to-market motion? Nobody's raising their hands, right? Which means that a lot of times, these go-to-market motions are not set. or do not have process, or it's not in a position where it could be easily repeated and scaled. So by leveraging these peer-to-peer information, learning how we've handled one situation, we can actually influence the go-to-market motion of how we go after our prospects, what we say to them, how we handle objections, how we handle competition. So what is this all about saying is that peer-to-peer actually gives us a lot of information that would otherwise be tribal knowledge if we don't give them a forum in order to express that piece of knowledge. So we put a peer-to-peer definition on the screen. The transfer of structured stories, information, and successes from one salesperson to another that is consistent with sales enablement and super easy capture. Now, I don't love reading off of slides, but I figured that won't be a good one. When I think about peer-to-peer, I think peer-to-peer exists, regardless if enablement is encouraging or not. But the problem with that is that if I, as an AE, tap on another AE's shoulder, unless we are giving them that forum, unless we are giving them a guidance on how to share knowledge, chances are they're sharing something inconsistent with what you're teaching, which makes it a lot harder for us on the enablement side. So the fact that you caught onto that keyword structured, it's amazing. Because what we want to do is not only give them a forum, but give them guidance, give them templates, help them understand what are the type of information we would love you to share, and how do you actually make it relatable, make it well worth the time, and really guide them along that sharing process. So a story that I love to share when it comes to that structured story side is, I had an AE once. He was 100% killing it. He had the biggest pipeline. He had one of the highest quotas. And the reason what he did work for him was because he had the will to do a lot more than others. As much as we would love every single AE to have that same amount of will, or every SDR to have that same amount of will, or every SE to have that same amount of will, we know that will is not something that we can always control. So if other reps try to replicate what he did, which was wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, do his research at 5 o'clock in the morning, start calling at 7 o'clock in the morning, call until 9 o'clock in the morning, and then start doing his email sequences at 10 in the morning. If we can get every rep to do that, great, but we know that it's not always replicable. But if he starts telling other people, well, that's the reason why I'm successful, what does that do from a motivation standpoint for the other AEs who are not willing to do that, right? So the reason we want to provide that structured forum for them is so that we can share information that can be repeatable, that can be scalable in a way that helps the business overall. Now, I want to do a little fun exercise, fun for me, maybe not for all of you, but within your tables, I want you all to take a minute, minute and a half, quietly look at this brain teaser and discuss amongst yourself what you think that answer is. There's a lot of smart people here, so this exercise can totally backfire on me. All right, help me out. What's the answer? 87. Anybody have a different answer? 78. Anybody have a different answer? Anybody? 89. All right, are those all the answers that we have? Well, 68. Okay, well, the answer is actually 87. You're absolutely right. If you flip it upside down, you get 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91. So congratulations, but why did we just do this exercise? So the reason we just did this exercise was just to prove my point, haha, I'm right, to prove my point from the last slide, right? So I put a question in front of you, you all talked to each other about it, but I gave you zero guidance on how to solve it. Right? And then we came up with different answers. Now, with this one, unlike a sales issue or situation, there was only one correct answer. But if I didn't provide guidance on, hey, if you flipped it around, you could probably figure it out, we got different answers. Some were right, some were wrong. No big deal, but it proves the point that a controlled, guided, peer-to-peer environment is going to help us be more consistent with our enablement practices. Now, there was a lot of sales enablement experts on the stage. I don't consider myself one yet. One day I will be. But for the peer-to-peer being an impactful part of sales enablement, it's not just something that I made up, right? Forrester actually did a study on this, and they have proven that with peer-to-peer as a delivery model, that you can improve impact to your business through peer-to-peer practices and peer-to-peer transfer of information. So what I'll do over the course of the next, I think like 5, 6, 7 slides, is talk about actual case studies of how I leveraged peer-to-peer in the past. And they're actually in chronological order. So you'll actually see that it started out as pretty simple, and then it got a little bit more advanced over the years that I was a sales enablement practitioner and changed jobs, changed teams, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the first one I'll talk about is during my time at Sage. And I won't spend too much time here because there's actually people at Sage here still, and they're much more of an expert at Sage than I am now. So I'm not going to talk about it too long. But when I was at Sage, when we first started the peer-to-peer practice, these were the obstacles that we saw. We saw that there was a large gap between the sellers that were doing well and the sellers that were doing okay and the sellers that were doing not so well. We had multiple teams. Again, Sage is a large organization. We had teams that were based on size of company. We had teams that were based on verticals that they targeted. We had direct versus channel. And we actually had trouble with manager buy-in at one point. Some of the managers at that point didn't find the sales enablement team credible. Now, obviously, that's our fault. There was things that we could have done better, and we learned from it and we did it better. But that was a problem, and it was really my first time actually being able to do peer-to-peer training. So the story I told at the beginning was at another organization where I realized that putting people on stage, doing peer-to-peer was great, but we didn't have a systematic way of doing it where we can actually scale it. So during my time at Sage, we did have SalesHood, and SalesHood did help us do this. So with all those obstacles in mind, we thought about, well, what can really help us get that manager buy-in? What can really help us cover some of those gaps between high-level performers, middle-level performers, and low-level performers? And how can we do it in a scalable way? So I would love to take the credit for this idea. It was not mine. This was my boss at the moment. He was the director of sales enablement while I was the sales enablement manager. But what we did is we actually launched a monthly deal win contest. We made it fun. We created criteria around how we're going to judge each video. And every single month, we would pick at least one, sometimes two, if we had a hard time deciding which one was best. Best videos, we rewarded them with $100 every single month for the winner. But the instructions were simple. Create a 3-minute video that talked about a win that you had that month, that covered what was a compelling event, what was the issue that your prospect was trying to solve, what obstacles did you overcome, or what obstacles did you run to and then did you overcome, and ultimately, what made them decide that Sage was the answer for their problems, right? 5 very easy topics, and the goal was for them to create a deal win video, 3 minutes or less, to talk about that deal. Now, we could have just said, hey, create a story, talk about the details. The story, the best details, it wins. We didn't want to do just that. We actually wanted to make creativity a part of it. We wanted to make structure and relatability a part of it because we want them to have fun with it. If they're not going to have fun with it, they're not going to want to do it. And it just becomes another assignment for them. So we incentivized them with the financial $100 win, but then we also made it fun for them so they felt like they're competing with each other. And I want to say that at the first few ones, we struggled to get them going. But after about the 4th month or so, it got really fun. We had one guy that didn't even say anything on the video, and all he did was hold up postcards with the story and just kept doing one of these. But it was great because what actually happened was we started sharing stories across the different teams, right? So we had folks in the SMB side of the business teaching folks from the mid-market side. We had folks from the software vertical teaching folks from the healthcare vertical, which were teaching folks from our general business vertical. We actually got buy-in from that manager that didn't like us. And I think, Alicia, you might know who that person is, but I'm not going to say it out loud. we got him to buy in on us, and we actually got him to encourage his team to share more stories, because what he found was that his team was actually learning more about use cases, learning more about the different types of compelling events that would cause somebody to look at Sage, learning more about how we actually tie into profit, income, cost, risk, and really understanding what does a CFO care about, which was our target persona at that point. So that's one use case. My second use case is, again, this is in chronological order, so we're building on top of it throughout my experience. For those that are not familiar with Expanse, Expanse is a cybersecurity company for enterprise companies. So the obstacles that we really faced here were really tough. We were in a very niche ICP because we only targeted the global 2,000 companies, meaning that unless they were willing to pay us $500,000, we didn't want to work with them. Now, was that right or wrong? That's another story. We don't have to talk about that. But because of that, it created very limited at-bats for our reps, meaning that every single cold call, every single discovery call, every single evaluation call, it mattered. Because when you only have 2,000 accounts to go after, you lose one, you only have 1,999 left, but distribute that amongst 20 reps and distribute the ones that aren't ready today, you have very limited opportunities to hit your quota. So, and it was mostly an outbound focused team as well, because we weren't a brand name, at least not until they got bought by Palo Alto Networks. They weren't a brand name. So it was really hard for us to gain traction. So when somebody did finally get somebody on the hook, we want to make sure we didn't mess that up. But also because we're in the cybersecurity space, nobody wanted to give us a case study. Nobody wants to talk about how crappy their cybersecurity was before they bought a platform to fix it, especially if you're targeting global 2,000 customers. They're like, wait, what? So because of this, and we also had the very experienced reps, because we were hiring reps that are 20, 30 years of sales experience because of the fact that we're targeting these large enterprise companies, right? So because of all these factors, it was really, really important for us to be able to share tribal knowledge. What we saw worked with, let's say, for example, Bank of America, and we were targeting JP Morgan Chase. We want to be able to replicate and leverage those stories into those discussions. And then if we were targeting Palo Alto Networks, we want to leverage those stories to target VMware. If we were targeting Microsoft, we want to leverage those stories that we got from GCP, right? So it's very important to share that tribal knowledge. And we had a very distributed team, so it's hard to actually share this knowledge. But what did we, I guess we switched the slides. We should have had the solution, then impact, but I'll talk about the impact first. The impact is that because we shared these stories, because we made it easy for them, because we made it relatable for them to find these answers, we actually were able to increase our opportunity conversion rate, because we're actually able to take those stories that the sales reps told and templatize that messaging, so it made it easier for us to take what worked with one company into another based on the vertical, based on the company size, based on the persona that we're targeting. And ultimately what we did was we took a lot of those stories that we got from the reps, we repurposed them, and we added into SalesHood, and we leveraged the guided selling feature in order for us to surface the right story at the right stage to the right opportunities. And what we saw was that for the opportunities that did not have related peer-to-peer content, we were winning only about 20% of the time. However, for the opportunities that had peer-to-peer related content that got surfaced from the guided selling functionality, we saw that win rate increase to low 30s. So we're winning about 10% more of the time because of the fact of these peer-to-peer stories and the fact that they can watch it, they can tell the story like it's their own. What we want salespeople to be able to do at all times is tell stories like it was their own, even if they weren't the one to close it. Because confidence in this conversation matters. And if you're telling a story and you can't convince them that you are confident in what you're saying, they're not going to believe you. So the solution that we had in order to get to those impact was guided selling with messaging. We had dedicated channels created to capture all the messaging that did work. So we did this through deal win videos. We did this through a Slack Slack channel notification that went out whenever a new deal win video came out. We did this with on the stage. We put peer-to-peer, or we put AEs on the stage to talk about their stories in regards to what we want them to share. And then we took all of that, brought it back to our product marketing team, actually worked on messaging in order to help with the prospecting process. And we actually created a cadence as well where we got reps used to the fact that they're going to hear their peers talk about their successes every other week. And that was the most attended session and the most engaged session we ever have out of all the enablement sessions that we do. That might be saying about something about how I run enablement, but let's ignore that for now. But because we spotlighted these stories, we actually gave them the ability to go back to the stories when they need it. This actually gave us the ability to do just-in-time learning as well through the guided selling process. And then the last case study I'll talk about was at my most recent company before I left for Forethought, where I'm at now. So same thing, we'll start with the obstacle first. We were a very transactional business in the SMB space, but we were trying to become more of a mid-market and enterprise company, which means that we had to really transition from that inbound to outbound motion in order for us to be able to see larger deals, in order for us to increase ASP, in order for us to get more worthwhile logos. And at the same time, while we were transitioning from that SMB to mid-market, we actually had a really niche product as well. For those that doesn't know, Nylas is an API platform, and it's not very exciting, but it does a lot of great things. But it only does it if they have thought about needing bi-directional email sync. Now, because it's an API product, it's sometimes hard because it's not really tangible. It's not like a SalesHood. It's not like a Salesforce. You can't really show them exactly what they're going to do because they would have to integrate the API into their software and then build a feature around it, right? So we actually had to do a lot of the art of the possible type of selling. Like, if you leverage our API, you can be able to build bi-directional email sync so you can email people from your platform and they don't have to context switch. Not my best pitch, but whatever. But we're selling the art of possible, which means that we actually have to understand how our existing customer base uses our API platform in order to build features that actually create impact for their product. So we actually had to evolve the way we told stories, right? In my past two companies, at Expanse, at Sage, we really concentrated on the prospecting side and the deal win side. But what we needed to do at Nylas was we actually needed to get the post-sales team involved, the CSM team, because a lot of the use cases, a lot of the building of the art of the possible actually comes post-implementation. So we actually created a program where our CSM team started sharing a lot more stories. The CSM team then talks about, hey, did you know this customer used our API in this way? Versus, our other customer actually doesn't even leverage our API to build a customer-facing function, but rather a back-end function to deliver data, right? So we actually leveraged a full-blown pre- and post-sale collaboration program where we're sharing success stories across the board now. And then what actually happened is that, again, we leveraged the Slack notifications in order to inform everybody whenever a new story comes along. And what we actually did was we took those stories then and actually created role play scenarios where we actually certified them on certain situations. So let's say we were trying to target a CRM company. Now we have role plays in regards to how CRM companies think. Let's say we're trying to target a ed tech company like Paul works at, right? Now we understand what do they care about in terms of the functionalities that the API can provide. If we were to go after a fintech company, they care about something completely different, right? So we were able to create these role play certifications based on these success stories and show them what good looks like so they can practice it until they're confident with it. Ultimately, all of this created a situation where we actually was able to bring out a program on large quarterly spiffs where we can say, hey, when you close a deal, and after you close a deal, or when you have a win with a customer, and after you have the win, what you want to do is go to SalesHood and create a short 3 to 5 minute video to talk about what that win is, how you got that win, why that win matters, what is the value of that win, and then be able to collect points in order to win this quarterly contest. So very executionary stuff here, so I won't spend too much time on it. But as you start thinking about your peer-to-peer program, just as with any other enablement program, you have to start with buy-in. The reason buy-in is important is because you have to understand how much time reps actually do peer-to-peer and create content for it, because it does take time. And every time you're taking them out of the field, they're not selling, right? So you have to make sure that the managers, the VPs, the CRO understands why this is important. And ultimately, going back to Paul's point, how does it ultimately tie back to revenue if we spend time on it? So the first step is always getting that buy-in first. But then also going back to the earlier point of creating a structured program, you have to be able to give them an environment, a platform in order to submit, in order to consume this peer-led content in a way that we want them to submit it and consume it. We want to share those templates, and we want to share those guidances so we can guide what their talk track sounds like. We can guide what their story talks like. So again, it becomes consistent with what we're trying to teach from an enablement perspective. So for example, if Medic or MedPick is really important to PlanView, we want to make sure that their stories ties in the different pieces of MedPick in regards to how they got that information, how they found out that information, how if they're missing something, what did they need to do from an action item standpoint to go back and get it. And most importantly, we have to understand what their motivation is, because we're asking them, again, to do something that is not a sales activity. So we have to understand what drives them, right? So some sales folks, they don't want to be management, right? They just want to sell. They just want to earn money. But what we want to be able to do is spotlight their success, get them promotions in regards to individual contributor titles, get them promotions in regards to raises, and really help put that idea in their head that if you put yourself out there and share your successes, not only do your peers see it, but management sees it, executive sees it, and then you will be rewarded for your success. And then it goes up to the next point, which is reward for participation. So spiffs work great. I think that's usually what I lead with in order to get the program started. But ultimately, what you also need to do is have a process intake for requests, meaning that we can't just put out content that we think is valuable. We have to understand what do they want to know, what do they want to hear, what do they want to learn that their peers did that worked really well, and then use this process in order to push out that content so you get more of that attention, you get more of that engagement. Ultimately, the key takeaways for this is peer-to-peer knowledge without any guidance is going to happen, like I said, and it can be beneficial, but it can also be detrimental depending on what's being transferred. But if you provide that guidance, if you provide that structure, it will be beneficial for your program and for your business. And understanding that motivation and providing that incentive structure really gets folks to want to share. They want to raise their hands. They want to be in the spotlight. They want to go into SalesHood and create that video without you having to ask them or without you having to badger them. And ultimately, as my examples show, it does make an impact on revenue. If we can tie this peer-to-peer content back to when they need it, through Salesforce, through SalesHood, we can actually tie it back to win rates, which means we can tie it back to attainment, which means we can tie it back to ARR. So I'm going to stop here because that's a lot of talking for me. But any questions?